Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in thick, relentless snowfall, the kind that softened streetlights and silenced the city beneath a false sense of peace. Every sound felt muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Inside a large, beautifully decorated house on the edge of town, Emma Carter sat alone on the couch, one hand resting on her swollen belly. At 8 months pregnant, even breathing felt heavy, yet the house around her felt emptier than ever. Warm fairy lights glowed on the Christmas tree, stockings hung neatly above the fireplace, and the smell of cinnamon candles filled the air, but none of it brought comfort. Instead, the decorations felt like props in a scene that had lost its meaning. Emma's phone vibrated on the coffee table, lighting up the dim room. For a moment, hope flickered in her chest. But it wasn't a call, just another brief message from her husband, Daniel Carter. He claimed he was stuck at a business retreat, his words polite, distant, and painfully brief. A successful corporate executive, Daniel always had meetings, deadlines, and excuses. Tonight was no different. Emma stared at the unread messages she had sent him earlier, each one unanswered. A familiar ache settled in her chest, heavier than the baby she carried. Her intuition whispered that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just loneliness, it was a sharp, crawling dread she couldn't explain. Pulling on her coat with trembling hands, Emma stepped outside into the falling snow, the cold biting through her clothes. The door closed softly behind her. By morning, the snow would erase every footprint, and Emma Carter would be gone without a trace. In the early years of their marriage, Emma had believed she was living inside a carefully crafted dream. Daniel had been attentive then, charming, ambitious, and endlessly reassuring. He spoke of forever with certainty, promising stability, love, and a future built together. When Emma became pregnant, she thought it would draw them closer, sealing their bond with new purpose. Instead, something quietly shifted. Daniel began coming home later, his smiles thinner, his attention divided. Conversations shortened. Affection turned routine, then rare. Emma told herself it was stress. His career was demanding, after all. She was the one who had suggested moving cities for his promotion, the one who left her job behind without complaint. She reminded herself that sacrifice was part of love. Yet small things began to gnaw at her confidence. Daniel guarded his phone like a secret vault, turning the screen away whenever she entered the room. Late-night calls ended abruptly when she asked who it was. Even his laughter sounded different, forced, distracted, as if his mind was elsewhere. At night, Emma lay awake beside him, feeling the distance between their bodies grow wider than the space in the bed. He stopped touching her belly, stopped asking how she felt. When she tried to talk, he brushed her concerns aside with tired excuses. Emma sensed the truth hovering just out of reach, but fear kept her from naming it. She clung to memories of who they used to be, unaware that the marriage she trusted had already begun to crumble. High above the snow-covered mountains, Christmas felt very different for Daniel Carter. The resort glowed with golden lights, laughter echoing through polished halls as music drifted from every corner. A crystal glass of champagne rested in his hand while he stood beside Lydia, her arm casually linked through his. She looked radiant in a red dress that clung effortlessly to her figure, her laughter light and carefree. Around them, people celebrated love, warmth, and indulgence, and Daniel allowed himself to forget everything he had left behind. His phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket, a dull irritation cutting through the festive mood. He glanced at the screen once, long enough to see Emma's name, then flipped the phone face down on the table. Lydia noticed and smirked, leaning closer as if to block out the reminder entirely. She joked about how pregnancy made women overly dramatic, her tone dismissive and cruel. Daniel laughed along, though something tight twisted briefly in his chest. He told himself Emma was fine, that she was safe at home, surrounded by comfort. Snow fell softly outside the resort windows, mirroring the storm swallowing his city miles away. Daniel raised his glass, toasting to freedom, success, and a future that felt thrillingly uncomplicated. While he enjoyed warmth, wine, and desire, he had no idea that the silence he was ignoring was about to become irreversible, and that the woman he left behind was slipping out of reach forever. Christmas morning arrived with an unsettling stillness. The neighborhood, usually alive with children's laughter and car doors slamming as families gathered, felt strangely muted. Fresh snow covered the streets, untouched and pristine. When a neighbor passed by Emma's house and noticed the curtains still drawn and no lights on, unease crept in. By noon, concern turned into alarm. The front door was locked, but no one answered repeated knocks. Police arrived shortly after, their boots leaving dark impressions in the snow as they entered the house. Inside, everything looked eerily preserved, as if time had stopped mid-breath. The Christmas tree still sparkled in the corner, its lights glowing softly despite the daylight. Wrapped gifts sat neatly underneath, untouched. In the kitchen, half-prepared food rested on the counter, abandoned without explanation. Emma's phone lay on the coffee table, its screen dark, while her handbag and coat were missing. In the bedroom, investigators found prenatal vitamins lined up carefully on the dresser, none taken since the night before. The bed was unmade, suggesting restless sleep, and the window was slightly ajar, letting in the cold. There were no signs of struggle, no broken furniture, no blood, just absence. Outside, fresh snowfall had erased any footprints that might have told a story. As officers exchanged grim looks, the reality settled heavily in the air. A woman 8 months pregnant had vanished on Christmas Eve, alone and vulnerable, in freezing weather. What began as a quiet welfare check was now a high-risk missing person case, one that carried the weight of 2 lives and far too many unanswered questions. Daniel's laughter faded the moment he finally looked at his phone. Dozens of missed calls crowded the screen, along with frantic messages from unknown numbers. His chest tightened as confusion turned into unease. Then a news alert flashed across the display, the words sharp and unforgiving, "A pregnant woman missing on Christmas Eve." He clicked the notification, his breath catching when he saw the photo. Emma's face stared back at him, pale and familiar, her name printed beneath the headline. The festive warmth of the resort suddenly felt suffocating. Lydia noticed a change in his expression and leaned closer, trying to read the screen. Her face drained of color, not with concern for Emma, but with fear. She whispered urgently, asking what this meant for them, for his reputation, for her own carefully protected image. Daniel barely heard her. A dull panic spread through him as guilt surged to the surface, tangled with dread and self-preservation. He tried calling Emma, his hands shaking, but the call went straight to voicemail. Around him, Christmas music played on, cruel and out of place. For the first time, the pleasure he had been enjoying curdled into terror. The silence he had ignored was no longer convenient. It was loud, public, and threatening to destroy everything he had tried so desperately to protect. The investigation moved quickly, urgency sharpening every decision. Detectives questioned Daniel as soon as he returned, noting how his story shifted under pressure. He spoke of a business retreat, but struggled to provide details, stumbling over timelines and locations. His polished confidence cracked just enough to raise suspicion. When asked why he hadn't answered his wife's calls on Christmas Eve, his explanation sounded rehearsed, hollow. Footage from nearby security cameras revealed Emma leaving the house late at night, her movements slow and unsteady in the snow. She looked distressed, pausing more than once as if uncertain where to go. Neighbors recalled hearing raised voices days before Christmas, an argument that ended abruptly. At the time, no one thought much of it, but now every memory felt significant. Financial records told another story. Hotel bookings at a luxury mountain resort, expensive jewelry purchases, and lavish dining expenses surfaced, all charged during the same days Daniel claimed he was working. Investigators connected the dots quickly, uncovering the existence of another woman. Lydia's name appeared repeatedly, tied to travel records and shared reservations. The image of a devoted husband crumbled under the weight of evidence. What remained was a man whose absence, lies, and indulgence coincided too neatly with his pregnant wife's disappearance. Though no proof of violence existed, doubt settled heavily around Daniel. The question was no longer whether his marriage was broken, but whether his betrayal had pushed Emma into danger, or something far worse. Emma woke to the sharp sting of cold air filling her lungs, her body aching as reality settled in. She was alive, though every movement reminded her how fragile she felt. The night she left the house replayed endlessly in her mind, the moment she had finally seen the truth on Daniel's phone, messages filled with affection that were never meant for her. The betrayal had crushed her more than any argument ever could. Staying had felt impossible. For the sake of the child growing inside her, she knew she had to leave. She hadn't planned much beyond survival. Her instincts carried her forward, through the snow and into a place she once volunteered years ago, a small, discreet shelter run by an old midwife who recognized the fear in her eyes instantly. Emma told only fragments of the truth at first, her voice shaking as she spoke. She was terrified, humiliated, and exhausted, but beneath it all, something stronger was forming. In the quiet of that hidden space, Emma listened to her baby's heartbeat and made a silent promise. She would not let betrayal define her ending. Fear still wrapped tightly around her chest, especially when she thought of the headlines and Daniel's face on the news, but anger gave her clarity. She realized disappearing wasn't weakness, it was protection. For the first time in months, she felt in control of her own breath, her own future, and the life she was determined to protect, no matter the cost. The news spread like wildfire, igniting a frenzy that Daniel could neither control nor escape. Headlines screamed across websites and social media: pregnant woman missing on Christmas Eve, husband's alibi questioned, mystery woman's disappearance shocks community. Friends, colleagues, and strangers alike dissected every detail, speculating about motives, secrets, and scandals. Daniel, once untouchable in his corporate sphere, found himself under a microscope, his every move scrutinized and judged. Lydia's carefully constructed glamour cracked under public pressure. Photos of the two together circulated online, paired with captions exposing her as the mistress. Comments flooded in, merciless and relentless, leaving no room for denial. The backlash wasn't about politics, or business, or even money, it was personal. People despised the betrayal, empathized with Emma, and demanded accountability. For Daniel, the professional respect and personal prestige he had built over decades began to crumble in real time. The contrast between the past and present could not have been starker. Weeks before, Daniel had celebrated Christmas in luxury, toasting with champagne and laughter, convinced nothing could touch him. Now, he sat in his office alone, papers untouched, phone ringing incessantly, every vibration a reminder of a life unraveling. Social media, emails, and news channels kept the story alive, the public's gaze unrelenting. Daniel finally realized what he had lost, not only the wife he betrayed but the image of control, success, and perfection he had clung to for so long. He had underestimated the world's ability to witness his failure in Emma's quiet strength. Emma felt a quiet power growing inside her, a stark contrast to the chaos Daniel and Lydia faced. She reached out to authorities on her own terms, revealing her location and sharing only what was necessary to ensure her safety and that of her unborn child. There was no dramatic confrontation, no desperate pleading, only calm, calculated steps toward reclaiming control. Every phone call, every word she chose, reinforced her autonomy, making it clear she would no longer be a passive participant in her own story. She refused to return to the life she had known. The house she once called home, the man she once loved, even the memories of the holidays they had shared, all belonged to the past. Legal actions were initiated, not out of vengeance, but for protection, restraining orders against Daniel, divorce proceedings, and measures to secure financial independence. Each step strengthened her resolve, reminding her that she no longer needed to rely on anyone else to safeguard her and her child. The transformation was profound. Where once fear and uncertainty had dominated her thoughts, clarity and empowerment now prevailed. She envisioned a future defined by her choices, her values, and her strength. Christmas, once a symbol of betrayal and loss, became instead a marker of awakening, a turning point where she discovered that courage and self-respect were the most powerful gifts one could claim. In reclaiming herself, Emma had turned what began as a nightmare into a testament of resilience and quiet triumph. Daniel's world unraveled with relentless speed. The divorce papers arrived like cold steel, a stark reminder that the life he had taken for granted was slipping from his grasp. The restraining orders ensured he could no longer approach Emma or the child he had helped create, a barrier between him and the future he had assumed would always be his. Corporate colleagues who once admired him now whispered, their respect replaced by doubt and judgment. Every meeting, every handshake, carried the invisible weight of scandal. Lydia, once his confidant and partner in indulgence, vanished the moment public scrutiny threatened her carefully curated image. She had no loyalty, no compassion, only self-preservation. Daniel, left alone in the grandeur he once celebrated, faced the emptiness that came from choices made in selfish pursuit of pleasure. The luxury resort trips, the late-night celebrations, the laughter shared with Lydia, all now felt like cruel echoes against the silence of his unraveling life. Christmas arrived again, but for Daniel, there was no warmth, no joy, no festive cheer. The snow that once mirrored a pristine world now seemed to mock him, its beauty highlighting his solitude. Every ornament, every twinkling light, reflected the void left by betrayal and his own actions. He had lost more than a wife or reputation, he had lost the illusion of control, the comfort of certainty, and the respect he had once commanded. In the stillness of his empty home, he confronted the truth: pleasure taken at another's expense often comes with a cost too devastating to bear. Months later, Emma held her newborn daughter in her arms, the soft cries filling the room with a warmth that had been absent for too long. The snow outside fell gently, dusting the streets and rooftops with a calm that mirrored the quiet inside her home. Gone were the fears, the endless waiting, and the uncertainty that had haunted her through the darkest nights. She had chosen life on her own terms, and now she embraced it fully, savoring every fragile, perfect moment with the child she had fought so hard to protect. The birth had been peaceful, attended by people who genuinely cared, a stark contrast to the isolation and betrayal she had endured. Each heartbeat of her baby reminded her of her own strength, of the courage it had taken to walk away, to leave behind a life that threatened to consume her. She traced tiny fingers, soft and warm, and felt an overwhelming sense of renewal, a second chance at happiness, untainted by lies or deceit. Emma reflected on the past, on Daniel's betrayal and the public spectacle that had followed, but she no longer felt anger or desperation. Instead, there was clarity and quiet satisfaction. Christmas, once a season of terror and heartbreak, now symbolized rebirth and resilience. The snow outside fell like a blessing, a reminder that even after storms, life could bloom again. For Emma, the nightmare had ended, replaced by a future defined by courage, independence, in the purest form of love, a mother's love for her child, a love unshakable and eternal.